There must be a mistake. People like him don't sit in 2A. Victoria Sterling said it the way people say things they believe are simply true, not cruel, just factual, the way you'd note that the sky was overcast or that a wine had gone to vinegar. She didn't even lower her voice. She said it to the flight attendant standing in the aisle between rows 1 and 2, loud enough for the first 4 rows of the cabin to hear, and she said it while looking directly at Marcus Hale as though he were a piece of furniture that someone had placed in the wrong room. Marcus looked down at his boarding pass. Seat 2A, first class, paid in full. He had printed it himself that morning on the same second-hand inkjet printer he'd used to print Ava's school permission slips and his own engineering certifications. The ink was a little thin on the left margin. Everything else was exactly as it should be. He looked up. Victoria Sterling was still watching him with that patient, expectant expression, the look of a woman who was accustomed to mistakes being corrected in her favor within moments of her noticing them. Beside Marcus, in seat 2B, his 7-year-old daughter Ava had stopped arranging her stuffed rabbit in her lap and gone very still. She had felt the temperature of the room change before she understood why. Children always do. "Daddy," she said quietly, "is something wrong?" "No, baby," Marcus said. "Everything's fine." He said it the way he said most things, without emphasis, without color, as though the words were simply information being passed from one person to another. His hands were folded in his lap. His posture was the same it had been when he boarded straight, unhurried, taking up exactly the space his ticket entitled him to and no more. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Rebecca, stood in the aisle with a clipboard she wasn't quite looking at. She was in her late 30s, with the particular controlled brightness of someone who had learned to make discomfort invisible through professionalism. She glanced between Marcus and Victoria Sterling, the way someone looks between a candle and a smoke alarm, trying to determine which problem was more urgent. "Sir," she said, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but could I just confirm your boarding pass once more? We want to make sure everything is sorted correctly before we complete boarding." Marcus handed it to her without a word. She studied it for a moment. He watched her study it and watched her recognize that there was nothing wrong with it and watched her continue to hold it anyway while she figured out what to do next. The cabin around them was not empty. Across the aisle in seat 2C, a man in a charcoal blazer was pretending to read something on his phone. 2 rows back, a couple in matching linen had gone quiet mid-conversation. No one was looking directly at Marcus. Everyone was looking at Marcus. Victoria Sterling had settled back into her seat with the air of someone who had already decided how this would resolve. "The ticket is valid," Rebecca said at last. She said it quietly, as though the volume would soften what came next. "But I'm wondering, and I apologize for this, I really do, if we might be able to offer you and your daughter some upgraded economy seating. We have some very comfortable bulkhead seats available that actually have more legroom than—" "My ticket is for 2A," Marcus said. His voice was level. Not cold, not angry. Level the way a horizon is level, not because it lacks feeling, but because it is simply the shape of the thing. "My daughter's ticket is for 2B. We'd like to sit in our seats, please." "Of course," Rebecca said. "Of course, you're absolutely right, and Rebecca." Victoria Sterling's voice came from across the aisle. Just the one word the name delivered with the quiet authority of someone who was accustomed to single-word instructions producing results. Rebecca looked at her. Then she looked back at Marcus. Then she looked at the clipboard. "I'm sorry," she said, and Marcus understood before she finished the sentence that she was not going to fight this battle. Not today. Not for him. Not in front of Victoria Sterling, who was almost certainly a frequent flyer with platinum status and a company card from somewhere that mattered to the airline's bottom line. "I'm going to have to ask you to move. There's been a configuration issue, and we need to accommodate—" "A configuration issue," Marcus repeated. "Yes. With my valid ticket for seat 2A. I'm so sorry." Marcus was quiet for a moment. The silence was not passive. It was the silence of a man who was choosing deliberately which version of himself to be in this moment, a choice he had been making in various forms for all of his adult life. "Are you moving us because of my ticket," he said, "or because of her comfort?" Nobody answered. That was the answer. Ava was watching him. She had the rabbit pressed against her chest, now both arms tight around it. She was 7, but she was not naive. She had grown up watching her father absorb things that should not be absorbed, watching him choose calm over eruption, watching him make that choice look like strength even when she understood in the wordless way of children that it was costing him something. Marcus unclipped his seatbelt. He reached up and took down their bag from the overhead bin. He did not slam the bin shut. He did not say anything else. He picked up the bag and Ava's small backpack and he said, "Come on, sweetheart," and they walked toward the back of the plane, while 15 first-class passengers found reasons to look at their phones, their windows, their reflections in the tray table's polished surface. He chose seats 28D and E, window and middle. He helped Ava in, first settled her rabbit beside her, gave her the window. She looked out at the tarmac for a long time without speaking. "Daddy," she said at last. "Yeah." Why didn't anyone say anything? He took a breath. He thought about all the honest answers to that question. He picked the one that wouldn't break something in her that hadn't been broken yet. "Sometimes people don't know what to say," he told her. That doesn't mean they were okay with it. She considered this. Were they okay with it? Marcus looked at the seat back in front of him. "No," he said. "I don't think most of them were." She seemed to think about that for a moment, then she settled the rabbit more firmly on the tray table and said, "Okay," as though she had filed the information away for later processing, which was exactly what she was doing. She was her father's daughter. He reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers found the boarding pass still there, still valid, still describing a seat he was no longer sitting in. He folded it once and put it back. 6 hours earlier, the morning had been ordinary in the particular way that ordinary mornings are precious. Marcus had made oatmeal with brown sugar because it was Ava's preference, and he had drunk his coffee standing at the kitchen counter while she ate at the table, and told him about a dream she'd had involving a golden retriever and a submarine. He had listened completely the way he always listened to her, not the way adults listen to children, with half their attention redirected toward adult concerns, but the way he had been trained to listen to everything fully without assuming he already knew what mattered. He had been preparing them for this trip for 2 weeks. Not the logistics, those came naturally to him. The preparation, he meant, was internal. He had told Ava more than once in different words that they were going somewhere together, and they were going in comfort because they had earned it, and that the comfort was theirs regardless of who looked at them. The tickets had come from his colleague Dennis Park, a systems engineer who owed Marcus a significant professional debt after Marcus had quietly fixed a software flaw in their avionics monitoring system that would have grounded 14 commercial aircraft and triggered a federal audit. Dennis had given Marcus 2 first-class tickets as a thank you in the informal way that colleagues sometimes exchanged favors, and Marcus had accepted them without fanfare because Ava had a mild respiratory sensitivity that made the recycled air in economy uncomfortable on long flights, and first class meant more space and better filtration, and his daughter's lungs mattered more than his comfort with accepting gifts. He had packed carefully. 1 carry-on for both of them. Ava's rabbit, her medication, a folder with their documents, including his own credentials from a previous professional life that he kept current out of habit, and a deeply ingrained sense that preparedness was not paranoia. It was simply how you stayed ready for a world that did not always announce its emergencies in advance. In the backpack's front pocket, tucked under a packet of tissues and a granola bar, was a small silver badge. Ava had found it that morning in the kitchen drawer when she was looking for scissors. She had held it up and turned it over in the light and asked him what it was. He had told her it was something from a long time ago, before she was born. Before her mother. She had looked at the wings embossed on the face of it and said, "Were you in the sky, Daddy?" For a while, he said, "Why did you stop?" He had taken the badge gently from her hand and put it in the drawer. "Because some things matter more than flying," he said. She had accepted this the way she accepted most of his shorter answers, as a placeholder, a signal that the full answer existed but was not for today. She had found the badge again when he was loading the car, and she had slipped it into her backpack without telling him in the way that children sometimes claim things they sense are important. The aircraft reached cruising altitude 43 minutes after takeoff. The sky outside seat 28E was clean and blue, the particular blue of high altitude, where the atmosphere thins and everything becomes sharper and colder and more itself. Ava had her head against the window. Marcus had his eyes closed, but he was not asleep. He was doing the thing he did on planes, the habitual, almost involuntary scan of sounds and sensations, the pitch of the engine, the subtle shift in air pressure, the rhythm of ordinary mechanical life thousands of feet above the earth. He heard the change before anyone else did. It was not dramatic. It was a sound, like a thought being interrupted, a fractional variation in the engine's tone that lasted less than a second and then resolved back into normalcy. Most passengers would not have registered it at all. Marcus's eyes opened. He listened. For 4 minutes, nothing happened. Then the aircraft dropped. It was not a gentle turbulence. It was a sudden, violent loss of altitude, the kind that sends drinks off tray tables and pulls screams involuntarily from throats. The overhead bins rattled, the oxygen mask panels in the ceiling shuddered but did not release. A child, somewhere in the rows behind them, began to cry. Ava grabbed the armrest. Her rabbit fell to the floor. Marcus reached down, found it without looking, placed it back in her lap, and put his hand over hers. "Marcus," she breathed. "Not Daddy, Marcus." She only called him that when she was frightened. "I've got you," he said. The plane leveled, shuddered, once leveled again. The seatbelt lights came on. Then the intercom clicked and the captain's voice came through, not smooth and reassuring the way captains' voices were supposed to sound, but compressed, stripped of its professional warmth, carrying a kind of urgency that the words themselves were trying to contain. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We are currently experiencing a technical issue with our flight management system and are working to resolve it. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." There was a pause. The kind of pause that a voice makes when the person producing it is dealing with something more urgent than the voice itself. "We would ask at this time if there is anyone on board with military flight experience, particularly with advanced aircraft systems. Please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately. That is all." The cabin went quiet. Not completely quiet, there was still the hum of the engines, the sound of someone crying softly 3 rows back, the tight whisper of a husband telling his wife something she was not finding comforting. But the particular quality of noise that filled commercial airspace, the aggregate sound of people in collective, casual unconcern, was gone. A young mother 2 rows ahead of Marcus pulled her infant tighter against her chest. She had the face of someone doing arithmetic about things that could not be calculated. Nobody stood up. Nobody raised a hand. The flight attendant who came through the curtain from the forward cabin was Rebecca. She was moving with controlled speed, her clipboard gone, her hands empty, her eyes scanning the rows. She was looking for something. Someone. She had gone almost past row 28 when Ava spoke. "Excuse me," Ava said. Rebecca stopped. She looked at the child in 28E, the same child she had watched walk to the back of the plane in silence, 3 rows behind her father's straight back. Ava looked up at her with large, serious eyes. "My daddy used to fly the big planes," she said. "Before my mommy died, he promised he wouldn't do it anymore." She paused. "But maybe you should ask him." Rebecca looked at Marcus. Marcus was already looking at her. He said nothing. He was doing the calculation, the same one he had been doing since the captain's voice came through the speaker, the same one he had until this moment been resolving in a particular direction. He had made Ava a promise. He had made it at her mother's grave a gray October morning 2 years ago, standing in a cemetery in Virginia, with his daughter's hand in his and his dress uniform pressed, and his face so controlled it might have been carved. He had said, "I am done with that. I am staying on the ground. I am staying with you." He had meant it. He had built a life around meaning it. The software engineering degree, the civilian certification, the job that kept him in the same time zone as his daughter, on the same planet as his daughter, alive in the same continuous thread of days as his daughter. But the young mother 2 rows ahead was pulling her baby tighter. And somewhere in the front of this aircraft, a man was sitting at the controls of a commercial airliner with a problem he did not know how to solve. "I need you to take her hand," Marcus said to Rebecca. "Don't let go." He was already standing before he finished the sentence. Rebecca looked at him. She had the expression of someone processing information faster than her face could arrange itself. "Sir, do you have any? Can you tell me?" "Former Air Force," Marcus said. He said it without ceremony, without the weight some men put on those words. F-16 and F-18. 7 years. Classified mission hours. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document, not a badge, not a credential card, but a printed Federal Aviation Administration certification, commercial aircraft systems, current, renewed 18 months ago as a condition of his civilian engineering work on the very flight management software that was failing in the cockpit 12 rows ahead of him. He held it out. This is who I am. Rebecca took the document. She looked at it. Her face did something complicated. You were in 2A, she said. I was in 2A, he agreed. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'll take you to the cockpit. From somewhere in row 8, a voice carried back through the cabin, a woman's voice, Victoria Sterling's voice, sharp with the particular irritation of someone whose narrative is being disrupted. Now he's pretending to be a pilot, really. Someone needs to... A man's voice answered her, calm. From row 11, ma'am. He's not pretending. The voice belonged to a man in his 50s with a military bearing. He had never fully shed, a retired Army Ranger named Calhoun who had been watching this since the boarding gate. I've been listening to him. He knows what he's talking about. Let the man through. Victoria Sterling said nothing else. The walk up the aisle was 12 rows. Marcus walked it the way he walked most things, steadily, without hurrying, without performing the urgency he felt, because urgency performed is just panic with better posture. Passengers watched him pass. Some of them had watched him walk the other direction 43 minutes ago. One or two of them looked at their hands. Rebecca knocked twice on the cockpit door and spoke her code into the intercom, and the door opened. The smell of the cockpit hit Marcus before the sight of it did, that particular mix of electronics and recycled air, and something else, something metallic and sharp, which he recognized as the smell of a control panel under stress. Captain Reynolds was slumped slightly to the left in the captain's seat, conscious but unfocused, the particular slack look of someone whose blood sugar had cratered at the worst possible moment. His hands were on the armrests, not the controls. He was breathing. He was present in only the most technical sense. The first officer, Daniel Price, was in the right seat. He was 29 years old and had the face of a man who had trained extensively for emergencies and was discovering that training and the actual emergency occupied different rooms in the nervous system. His hands were on the controls. His knuckles were white. He had isolated the autopilot failure and was holding altitude manually, which he was doing correctly. But the dual-system fault hydraulic assist on the secondary flight surface, combined with the flight management computer error, was a combination he had not encountered outside of a simulator, and simulators are not equipped with the weight of 212 passengers. He looked at Marcus. You're the military pilot, he said. I'm the military pilot, Marcus said. He was already reading the instrument panel. He had been reading it for the last 10 seconds, the way he had once read terrain from altitude systematically without assumption, letting the instruments tell him their own story before he decided what it meant. The story they were telling him was specific and under the circumstances manageable. Your primary autopilot disengaged due to a sensor disagreement in the air data system, Marcus said. Your secondary engaged and then flagged a hydraulic variance in the right elevator. The computer threw both out. That's your warning lights. He moved to the jump seat, which Rebecca had pulled down for him and strapped in. You're flying clean. Both elevators are functional. This is a systems failure, not a mechanical one. Daniel Price exhaled. It was not a breath of relief. It was the breath of a man releasing something he had been holding for 11 minutes and then taking back something harder. What do I do? You're going to keep doing what you're doing, Marcus said. I'm going to talk you through it. First thing, get me air traffic control. What happened in the next 47 minutes was not heroic in the way that word is usually used. It was not loud. It was not dramatic in its externals. It was methodical, precise, and deeply difficult, which is the actual nature of competence under pressure, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make the decisions. Marcus had not sat in a cockpit in 2 years. His hands knew the difference between the civilian simulator he had used for his FAA certification work and the actual controls he was now watching Daniel Price manage. His mind had not forgotten anything. The mind does not forget what the body learned under duress. That was one of the things nobody told you about the military when you left it, that the body retained everything. The correct grip on a stick, the habit of reading an instrument cluster left to right, top to bottom in under 3 seconds. The specific weight of a decision when the consequences are not recoverable. He walked Daniel through the manual override protocol for the flight management computer step by deliberate step. Not condescendingly, there was no time for condescension, but with the precision of someone translating a very specific language into terms that would land correctly the first time. He said, isolate the faulty sensor channel here, confirm the secondary ADC is reading within normal range, push that override toggle, and hold it for 2 seconds. Daniel did each thing worked. He spoke to air traffic control and gave them a precise status report in the clipped information-dense language of military aviation, which the controller on the other end recognized and responded to with the calm of two professionals who both understood the same grammar of crisis. The controller's name was Terrence, and Marcus would later learn he had 17 years in the Atlanta Tracon facility and had handled 3 previous in-flight emergencies, none as complex as this. Terrence gave them priority routing to a clear approach corridor without being asked. He cleared 3 aircraft out of their descent path without ceremony. He read back every altitude assignment twice and asked no unnecessary questions. Marcus was grateful for him in the silent, functional way you are grateful for a good instrument when you need one. He coordinated the diversion to Hartsfield-Jackson 40 minutes from their original destination, the longest runway in the state of Georgia, emergency services already notified and staging at the far end of runway 28, left. Marcus had landed on shorter strips in worse weather in aircraft that weighed less and responded faster, and even so he went through the numbers twice before he said anything to Daniel about the approach. Captain Reynolds in the left seat had begun to recover. He had eaten 2 glucose tablets that Rebecca had pressed into his hand. He was tracking the conversation. He said Marcus's name once, just his name, quiet, acknowledging, and Marcus nodded and continued. Reynolds's hands were in his lap. He had understood the situation with the clarity that comes sometimes in the aftermath of a medical event, a strange, undefended lucidity, and what he understood was that the most useful thing he could do right now was remain still and let Marcus work. There was a moment somewhere over central Georgia at 19,000 feet when Daniel Price asked a question that was not about procedure. "How are you doing this?" he said. "You've been out for 2 years. How are you?" He stopped. Finished the thought differently. "How do you just know?" Marcus looked at the altimeter. "You trained for this," he said. "So did I. Training doesn't have an expiration date. It sits there until you need it." He did not say the rest of it, which was that training also sits there through everything else, through the funeral, through the move to a smaller house, through the first week back at work, when you move through the world in a kind of thick, ambient grief, through every morning you make oatmeal with brown sugar for a small person who doesn't yet understand why her father is sometimes sad when he thinks she isn't watching. The training sat through all of that. It was still there. The second drop came at altitude 11,000 feet during their descent. It was briefer than the first, but sharper, a loss of 300 feet in 4 seconds, the kind of event that produces binary responses in a cockpit. Either the person in the controls maintains their form or they don't. Daniel Price maintained his form. His hands moved. The way hands move when they have been told exactly what to do by someone who has done it before, and the aircraft steadied, and Marcus said, "Good. That's right. Keep that attitude," and Daniel said, "Got it," and the altimeter stopped falling. In row 28, Ava Hale sat with her rabbit in her arms and Rebecca's hand in hers and did not cry. She had learned this from her father. Not the stoicism, the trust, the knowledge that controlled meant capable, that when the person you loved went quiet and straight and purposeful, it was not because they had left you, it was because they were working on something that needed all of them. She had the badge in her jacket pocket. She had put her hand around it when the plane dropped. She held it there. The runway at Hartsfield-Jackson came up in the windshield at 17 minutes after 3 in the afternoon, gray and wide and flanked by emergency vehicles whose lights were already going red and blue, turning silently in the flat afternoon light. The crosswind was 14 knots. Daniel Price had never executed a manual crosswind approach of this kind. Marcus had done it in conditions that would make this look like a practice run. "Slight right rudder," Marcus said. "Hold your center line. You're a little left. There, that's it. Watch your airspeed. 85. Don't let it bleed below 80. Good. Your flare now. Hold it." The wheels touched. Not softly. Not the way you land when everything is working and the sky cooperates, but firmly, correctly, the way you land when you are placing a machine carrying human lives onto the ground and you need it to stay there. The cabin erupted. Not in the careful, measured way of polite applause. In the raw, involuntary way of bodies that have understood for a sustained period that they might not be continuing and that are now recalibrating. People wept. The young mother with the infant pressed her face into the baby's neck. The man in the charcoal blazer, who had been very still for the past 40 minutes, sat forward and put his hands over his face and stayed that way. In the cockpit, Daniel Price set his hands in his lap and looked at them. Then he looked at Marcus. "Thank you," he said. Marcus unstrapped from the jump seat. He nodded once, which was the most he had to offer in that direction. He had not done it for thanks. He had done it because 212 people needed one person to know what to do, and he knew what to do, and there was no version of himself that would have sat in row 28 and let that equation remain unsolved. He was thinking about Ava. He found her where he had left her, row 28E, window seat, rabbit in lap, Rebecca still beside her, hand still held. When she saw him come through the curtain, she stood up without saying anything and walked into him, and he wrapped both arms around her and held her the way he had held her at her mother's grave, which was to say completely with nothing, held back. "I broke my promise," he said into her hair. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You broke a small one to keep a big one." He pulled back to look at her. She was 7 years old and completely correct. "What's the big one?" he asked. She looked at him steadily with her mother's eyes. "You always come home," she said. He did not say anything else. He sat down beside her, and she settled back against his shoulder, and they waited for the doors to open. The gates at Hartsfield-Jackson were crowded in the particular way of unplanned arrivals. Ground crew, medical personnel, 2 men in suits from the airline's operations team, a woman from the FAA in a blue jacket who was already writing something on a tablet. Rebecca had given someone a full account during the approach, and the account had moved efficiently through the relevant channels as accounts of near disasters tend to do. Victoria Sterling deplaned quickly. She was one of the first off moving with the focused purpose of a woman who had somewhere more important to be, which was her usual condition. She did not look toward row 28 as she passed it. The man in the charcoal blazer paused at Marcus's row. He looked at him for a moment. He said, "I should have said something earlier." On the plane when he stopped. Started again. "I didn't say anything and I should have." He put out his hand. Marcus looked at it. Then he shook it. "Thank you," he said, because it was the true answer. The retired Army Ranger Calhoun stopped on his way past and said nothing. He just looked at Marcus the way soldiers sometimes look at each other, the look that acknowledges a shared knowledge of what it costs to be what you are, and then he nodded once and moved on. The FAA representative's name was Diane Marsh, and she found Marcus before he had reached the gate. She had the particular efficiency of someone who understood that every minute she spent not doing her job was a minute that mattered. She confirmed his identity, reviewed his certification, asked him 4 precise technical questions about the system's failure and his intervention, and wrote the answers down. She said the incident would be reviewed and a full report prepared. She said his account would be central to that report. She said, and this was the only moment she allowed anything other than professionalism into her voice, that what he had done was not nothing. "I know," he said. The airline's operations team was waiting near the gate. They were apologetic in the efficient, practiced way of people who are apologetic often. The senior operations manager, a man named Garrett, led Marcus and Ava to a private room off the main terminal and offered them water, and then almost immediately began to speak about the incident in the first-class cabin which he had been briefed on, and which he described as unacceptable, which was the word the airline had decided to use. Marcus sat in the chair across from Garrett and let him finish. Then he said, "I don't want an upgrade. I don't want miles or compensation or a formal letter. I have one request." Garrett waited. "Train your people," Marcus said. "Not a memo. Actual training. Actual conversations, so that the next time a black man sits down in a seat, he paid for the person whose job it is to protect that seat actually does their job." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "That's a fair ask," he said. "It's the only ask," Marcus said. Rebecca came to the private room 20 minutes later. She came alone, without clipboard or uniform authority. She had changed into her civilian clothes, which made her look smaller and more herself. She stood in the doorway for a moment before she came in. Her eyes were red at the edges. She looked at Ava first. "I'm sorry," she said to Ava. Then she looked at Marcus. "I'm sorry," she said again. The second one held more weight because it knew more. Marcus nodded. He did not tell her it was okay because it had not been okay, and telling someone it was okay when it wasn't okay is a way of making the error invisible, and he had spent too much of his life accommodating invisibility. But he said, "Thank you for staying with her." Rebecca looked at Ava, who was feeding her rabbit a pretend cracker from a pretend bag, with absolute seriousness. "She held my hand the whole time," Rebecca said. "She does that," Marcus said. "It's a family thing." The video surfaced within the hour. Someone in row 7 had recorded the original exchange in the first-class cabin. Not the whole thing, just the part that mattered, just the 30 seconds in which Marcus stood and asked the question that no one answered and then picked up his daughter's bag and walked away. The recording was not high quality. It did not need to be. The clarity that mattered in it was not technical. It found its audience the way certain things do, not because anyone pushed it, but because it named something that enough people recognized. Victoria Sterling's name was not in the video. Her face was briefly visible. Within 2 days, her name was not difficult to find because names attach themselves to actions, and actions once recorded are harder to contextualize than the people who performed them believe. She issued a statement through her publicist that used the words miscommunication and unfortunate and clarification. The statement did not use the word apology. It performed in the approximate shape of regret without containing any. The airline's formal statement was more direct, because Garrett had been in the room when Marcus made his request and had understood that the only version of this story that served anyone's interest was the honest one. The statement acknowledged the incident. It acknowledged that Marcus's ticket had been valid. It announced a review of passenger conduct protocols and staff training procedures. It named Marcus Hale and stated that his actions during the subsequent emergency had saved every life aboard the aircraft, which was true, and which the statement said without embellishment because the fact required none. Captain Reynolds sent a handwritten note that arrived at Marcus's home 4 days later. It was brief and direct and said exactly what a man says when he understands that he was unconscious while someone else flew his airplane and kept everyone alive. Marcus read it twice and put it in the kitchen drawer beside the silver badge. Daniel Price called the following week. He was a different kind of caller than Marcus expected, less formal, more shaken, still processing. He talked for a while about the approach about the moment the wheels touched. He said he had applied for an advanced systems certification course that he had been putting off. He said he was going to stop putting things off. Marcus said that sounded like a good idea. The Federal Review of the Flight Management System failure identified a software vulnerability in the air data sensor arbitration logic, a flaw that Marcus, in his capacity as a civilian avionics systems engineer, had actually flagged in an internal technical review 14 months earlier. The flag had been deprioritized in the development cycle. The incident prompted the FAA to issue an airworthiness directive requiring the patch across all affected platforms within 90 days. Marcus was not cited by name in the directive. The work was the citation. Ava went back to school the week after. She told her teacher, in the matter-of-fact way she told most things, that they had been on a plane that had trouble, and her daddy had helped fix it. Her teacher said that must have been very scary. Ava considered this. "A little," she said, "but my daddy was there, so it was okay." She kept the bag. She put it on her bookshelf between a ceramic frog and a photo of her parents taken at a park when her mother was still alive, her father laughing in a way. He rarely laughed in other photographs, her mother's hand on his arm, both of them caught in an ordinary moment of happiness. Ava had never explained why she chose that spot for the badge, and Marcus had never asked because some arrangements are complete in themselves and don't require explanation. On a Thursday evening 6 weeks after the flight, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table finishing a technical report when Ava came downstairs in her pajamas with the rabbit under her arm and sat across from him. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah." "Were you scared? On the plane?" He looked at her. He thought about the honest answer. "Yes," he said. She considered this with the gravity she brought to most important things. "Were you scared of flying or scared of something else?" He put down his pen. "Something else," he said. "Of leaving me." It was not a question. "Yeah," he said. She nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she had already suspected the answer and was confirming it for the record. Then she stood up and came around the table and put her hand on top of his the way he put his hand over hers when she was frightened, and she said, "I know, but you have to go when people need you." and then you come back. She said it the same way she had said everything that day, simply without drama, as though she were stating an obvious truth about the structure of the world. He supposed she was. He covered her hand with his other hand, and they stayed like that for a moment, father and daughter at a kitchen table, the report unfinished, the badge on the shelf upstairs, the week moving steadily forward into whatever came next. There is a kind of dignity that is not given and cannot be taken. It is not the dignity of position or credential or the particular seat assignment on a commercial flight. It is the dignity of a person who knows exactly who they are, who carries that knowledge without performance, and who does not require the room's agreement to remain themselves. The room will often withhold that agreement. The room has its own calculations, comfort, assumption, the slow gravity of what has always been done. The room is not always wrong about everything, but it is reliably wrong about this, that dignity can be relocated by someone else's discomfort. Marcus Hale walked to the back of the plane because he chose to, not because he had been diminished. He walked back to the front because people needed him to, not because he needed to prove something. Both walks were his. Both happened in the same body with the same hands, carrying the same history. His daughter understood this before she could have named it. She held the badge and she held his hand, and she knew that what he had, the thing that could not be revoked by a boarding announcement or a woman's certainty that someone like him did not belong in seat 2A, was not the credential. The credential was just its translation into language that the room could read. What he had was older than the badge. What he had always had. She knew that. She was 7, and she knew that, and she was not surprised by any of it. That is worth paying attention to, not the crisis, not the emergency landing, not the formal accountability that followed. What is worth paying attention to is the child who was not surprised. Because she had been watching her father her whole life, and what she had learned from watching him was not that the world was fair. What she had learned was that being who you are completely and without apology is both the hardest and the most durable thing a person can do. She intended to do it too.